A treacherous egg hunt. Chapter 1. The Easter egg had been in the Croft family for 3 generations, though no one could quite agree on how it had come into their possession. Some said a Croft ancestor had won it in a card game from a Russian countess. Others whispered it had been a gift from a foreign prince, grateful for a debt of honour paid. Lord Julian Croft cared little for its provenance. What mattered now was that his grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness of Pembroke, had entrusted it to him, the family's acknowledged scapegrace, and it had vanished not 12 hours into the Easter house party. "You are certain it was in the study?" Julian asked, though he had already asked 3 times. Jenkins, his valet, looked pained. "Quite certain, my lord. You placed it in the hidden compartment behind the Shakespeare folio yourself. I watched you do it." Julian ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that betrayed more agitation than he cared to show. The house party was his grandmother's annual Easter tradition, a gathering of the most prominent families in the Shire, and this year she had insisted Julian play host at Croft Manor while she remained in Bath for her health. It was a test, he knew, a chance to prove himself capable of responsibility before she revised his inheritance in favour of his more reliable younger brother. And now the damned egg was gone. "Who has been in the study since last night?" he asked. Jenkins produced a small leather notebook. His Grace, the Duke of Wrexham, for a glass of port after dinner. Lady Amelia Ashworth, who borrowed a book. Mr. Theodore Pemberton, who claimed he was looking for a quiet place to write a letter. And Mrs. Helena Thorne. Julian's jaw tightened at the last name. Helena Thorne. The widow who had descended upon his house party like a bird of prey, all sharp opinions and sharper eyes. She had arrived 3 days prior as the companion of her late husband's sister, Miss Lydia Thorne, a sweet, impressionable girl whom Julian suspected his cousin Geoffrey had set his sights upon. Mrs. Thorne was seen near the study at 10:30, Jenkins continued, consulting his notes. One of the footmen reports she emerged looking hurried. "Summon her to the library," Julian said, his voice flat. "And send for Mr. Pemberton and Lady Amelia as well. We shall get to the bottom of this before breakfast is concluded." Helena Thorne had not expected to enjoy the Easter house party at Croft Manor. She had come for Lydia's sake, to chaperone her late husband's youngest sister through a season of eligible gentlemen, and to ensure the girl did not make the same mistake Helena herself had made at 19, marrying a charming wastrel who promised the world and delivered only debt and disappointment. But Croft Manor was lovely in the spring, with its ancient yew hedges and daffodil-dotted lawns, and she had allowed herself a small measure of pleasure in the quiet hours before the other guests stirred. That morning, she had risen early to walk in the gardens, returning through the manor's side entrance just as the household was waking. She was in her chambers, adjusting the lace at her cuffs, when a footman arrived with Lord Croft's summons. "His lordship requires my presence?" she repeated, arching one eyebrow. "How very peremptory." "His lordship was most insistent, madam." She found Julian Croft in the library, standing before the fireplace with an expression of carefully controlled fury. He was, she had to admit, though she would never say it aloud, a remarkably handsome man, all sharp cheekbones and restless energy, with eyes the colour of winter storms. But she had learned to distrust handsome men who wore their charm like armour. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, gesturing to a chair, "thank you for coming so promptly. Your footman made it clear I had little choice in the matter, my lord." She seated herself, but did not accept the tea he offered. "To what do I owe this summons?" Julian set down the teapot and regarded her with open suspicion. "A family heirloom has gone missing from my study. A jewelled Easter egg of considerable value. Several guests were in the vicinity last evening. You were among them." Helena's spine stiffened. "You are accusing me of theft?" "I am inquiring," he said carefully. "The footman who saw you near the study noted you appeared to be in a hurry." "I was retrieving a shawl for Lydia. who had wandered into the conservatory and caught a chill. Helena rose to her feet, her eyes flashing. "If you are suggesting I had any part in the disappearance of your trinket, Lord Croft, you are very much mistaken. I am a guest in your house, not a common thief to be summoned and interrogated." She turned toward the door, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Thorne." His tone had changed, the suspicion giving way to something she could not quite name. "I meant no offence, but the egg is irreplaceable, and my grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness, has a particular attachment to it. I must recover it before the party concludes on Easter Monday, or I shall be facing consequences that extend far beyond mere embarrassment." Helena paused, her hand on the door handle. She had heard the rumours about Lord Julian Croft, the gambling, the scandalous affairs, the perpetual disappointment he represented to his family. But in that moment, she heard something else beneath his polished drawl. Fear. Not of losing the egg, but of losing his grandmother's faith. She turned back slowly. "If you intend to search my chambers, I shall not stop you. You will find nothing, because I took nothing. But I would advise you to look closer to home for your thief. Your cousin, Mr. Pemberton, for instance, seemed remarkably interested in the study's lock when I passed by yesterday afternoon." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Pemberton?" "I mention it only as an observation," Helena said coolly. "Do with it what you will." She left him standing in the library, and if her heart beat a little faster than usual, she attributed it to outrage, and not at all to the way Lord Julian Croft had looked at her when she mentioned his cousin's name, as though she had handed him the first piece of a puzzle he had not known he was trying to solve. Chapter 2. By noon, the house was in an uproar. Julian had attempted to keep the theft quiet, but in a house party of 23 guests and twice as many servants, secrets were impossible to contain. The missing egg became the sole topic of conversation, and with it came speculation. Mrs. Thorne's name was on many lips, whispered behind fans and murmured over tea trays. Helena heard them. She saw the way Lady Amelia looked at her, with pity or satisfaction she could not tell, and the way Mr. Pemberton smiled at her over breakfast, as though they shared a joke she did not understand. She endured it through luncheon, through an afternoon walk in the gardens where the other ladies fell silent when she approached, through a tense dinner where Lord Croft could not seem to meet her eyes. It was only after the gentlemen had withdrawn for their port that she allowed herself to retreat to her chambers and let her composure crack. She was not a thief. She had never taken anything that did not belong to her, though God knew she had been tempted, in the dark years of her marriage, when her late husband had gambled away their household funds and left her to bargain with tradesmen for another week's credit. But she had not taken the egg, and yet suspicion clung to her like cobwebs, impossible to brush away, because she was the widow without fortune, the outsider whose presence at such a gathering was tolerated only for Lydia's sake. She could not let this destroy Lydia's prospects. If the scandal attached itself to Helena, it would attach itself to her charge, and sweet, hopeful Lydia would find herself shunned by the very society that was meant to be her salvation. Helena made her decision as the clock struck midnight. She would find the egg herself. Julian found her in the study at 1 in the morning, dressed in a dark gown that made her blend with the shadows, a small candle in her hand illuminating the secret compartment behind the Shakespeare folio. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, and had the satisfaction of watching her startle, though to her credit she did not drop the candle. "I see you have returned to the scene of the crime." She turned to face him, and even in the dim light he could see the defiance in her expression. "I am looking for clues, Lord Croft, since your own investigation seems to consist primarily of allowing your guests to destroy my reputation. I thought I might take matters into my own hands." Julian closed the study door behind him and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "Destroy your reputation is a bit strong, is it not?" "Is it?" She set the candle on the desk and faced him fully. "I have been in this house 3 days, and already I am the subject of every whispered conversation. The fortune-hunting widow, the woman who married poorly and is now desperate enough to steal. They have decided I am guilty, and no amount of evidence to the contrary will change their minds." There was fury in her voice, but Julian heard the hurt beneath it. He had spent his life being the subject of whispered conversations himself, and he recognized the particular wound of being judged by people who had never troubled to know you. "I do not think you took the egg," he said quietly. She stared at him. "You accused me this morning." "I questioned you." "There is a difference." He moved away from the door, circling the desk to stand beside her. "You were seen near the study, and you had means and opportunity. But motive?" He shook his head. "If you were a thief, Mrs. Thorne, you would not be quite so obvious about it, and you certainly would not be prying open secret compartments at midnight, risking discovery, if you already knew where the egg was hidden." Helena's lips pressed together. "Then why is everyone so convinced of my guilt?" "Because I am an unsatisfactory host," Julian admitted, "and it is easier to blame the outsider than to admit that the thief might be one of their own." He moved to the hidden compartment, examining the mechanism with a practiced eye. "You mentioned Pemberton yesterday. What did you see?" She hesitated, and he could see her calculating whether to trust him. It was a fair hesitation. He had given her little reason for trust. "Yesterday afternoon, I was returning from the garden and passed through the corridor outside the study," she said at last. "Your cousin was examining the lock on the door. When he saw me, he pretended to be adjusting his cuff, but I saw the tools in his hand. I thought nothing of it at the time. I assumed he had lost his key. But now it seems suspicious." Julian crouched to examine the lock himself. It was an old mechanism, the sort that could be picked with the right tools and a little patience. "Pemberton has always had more ambition than fortune. He has been pressing my grandmother for an advance on his inheritance for years, and she has always refused." "The egg," Helena said slowly, "is worth a considerable sum, is it not?" "Considerable enough to settle a great many debts." Julian rose, a plan forming in his mind. "Tell me, Mrs. Thorne, how good an actress are you?" Chapter 3. The plan was reckless, and Helena told him so. She told him so again when he explained it to her in the small hours of the morning, sitting across from her in the library with a map of the house spread between them. She told him so when he insisted they share breakfast the next morning, presenting a united front to the curious eyes of the other guests. And she told him so when he took her hand in the garden that afternoon, ostensibly to steady her over a rough patch of ground, and did not let go. "Your hand is trembling," he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I am unaccustomed to this sort of deception," she whispered back, "and your Aunt Lady Featherstone is watching us with the intensity of a hawk observing its prey." "Excellent. Let her watch." Julian drew her closer, his arm sliding around her waist. "Pemberton is at the far end of the terrace, pretending to read a newspaper. He has looked up 3 times in the last minute. Our performance is having the desired effect." Helena forced herself to relax against him, to smile as though his proximity was a pleasure rather than a torment. He smelled of sandalwood and clean linen, and his arm was warm and solid around her. She had not been held by a man in 6 years, not since her husband's death had released her from a marriage that had grown cold and cruel. She had not realized how much she had missed it. "We are to make him believe I have the egg," she said, more to distract herself than anything else. "And then we wait for him to come to me." "He will come," Julian said with certainty. "Pemberton has always been impatient. If he believes the egg is in your possession, he will not wait long to claim it, and when he does—" His hand tightened on her waist. "When he does, I will be there." She looked up at him then, truly looked, and saw past the rakish smile to the man beneath. There was tension in his jaw, a weariness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and too many disappointments. He was playing the part of the charming rogue, she realized, because it was easier than letting anyone see how much he cared. "Why does the egg matter so much to you?" she asked quietly. "Beyond the obvious, I mean. It is a family heirloom, yes. But you spoke of consequences." Julian was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant line of trees. "My grandmother raised me," he said at last. "My parents died when I was young, and she took my brother and me in when no one else would. She has always believed in me, even when I gave her little reason to. This house party, the responsibility, it was her way of giving me one last chance to prove myself. If I cannot even keep a simple heirloom safe—" He shook his head. "I am tired of disappointing her." "You are not disappointing her," Helena said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "You are doing everything in your power to set things right. That is not the act of a disappointing man." Julian turned to look at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You see me," he said softly. "No one has done that in a very long time." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by spring flowers and the distant murmur of other guests, and Helena felt the careful walls she had built around her heart begin to tremble. "We should return," she said, pulling away, "before our audience grows suspicious." Julian let her go, but his eyes followed her all the way back to the house. The trap was set that evening. Helena retired early, pleading a headache, and made a great show of consulting with Lydia about the location of her jewel box before departing. Julian had arranged for the servants to be elsewhere, for the corridor to be dark, for the lock on her chamber door to be left deliberately unlatched. She sat in the darkness, her heart pounding, and waited. The clock struck 11, then midnight. She began to think she had been wrong, that Pemberton was more cautious than Julian had assumed, that the whole scheme was folly. And then she heard the door open. She did not move, did not breathe, as footsteps crossed the room toward her dressing table. Through half-closed eyes, she watched a shadowy figure bend over the jewel box, searching for something that was not there. "You will not find it there," she said, and had the satisfaction of watching the figure jump. The candle flared to life, and Theodore Pemberton stood revealed, his face pale with shock and something darker. Rage, perhaps, or desperation. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, recovering himself with visible effort. "I was looking for— that is, I heard a noise and came to ensure you were safe." "You came to steal the egg you thought I had taken," Helena corrected, rising from her chair. "Only I never had it, did I? You took it from the study, and you have been allowing me to take the blame ever since." Pemberton's pleasant features hardened. "You cannot prove that." "I do not need to," Helena said, and saw the moment he realized his mistake. The door swung open, and Julian stepped into the room, flanked by 2 footmen. In his hand, he held a small velvet pouch, and from it he withdrew the jeweled Easter egg, whole and undamaged. "We found it in your chambers this afternoon, Pemberton," Julian said quietly. "Hidden behind a loose panel in your wardrobe. The same technique you used to hide it in my study, I imagine." Pemberton's face went white, then red. "You searched my rooms without my permission?" "I searched my house," Julian corrected, "for my property. Theft, cousin, does not require permission to be investigated." The 2 footmen stepped forward, and Pemberton made no move to resist. His defiance crumbled into something that looked almost like relief, as though the weight of his deception had finally become too heavy to carry. "I needed the money," he said, his voice breaking. "My debts. If I did not pay by Easter, they would have ruined me. I only meant to borrow it, to sell the jewels and replace them with paste, but then she—" He looked at Helena with something like hatred. "She saw me at the lock, and I knew she would tell someone, so I let them all think she had taken it." Julian's expression did not soften. You let an innocent woman's reputation be destroyed to protect your own. That is not borrowing, Pemberton. That is cowardice. He gestured to the footman, who took Pemberton's arms and led him from the room. The corridor outside was filling with other guests, drawn by the commotion, and Julian closed the door firmly against them. When they were alone, he turned to Helena. You are unharmed? Perfectly. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the adrenaline leaving her suddenly weak. He did not hurt me. He would have, if you had let him find what he was looking for. Julian crossed to her, and to her surprise, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. You were very brave tonight. I was very foolish, she corrected, but she did not pull away. If you had not been waiting outside. I was waiting, he said simply. I would always be waiting, if you needed me to be. She looked down at their joined hands, at the elegant, capable fingers wrapped around hers, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Lord Croft. Julian, he interrupted. After tonight, I think you might call me Julian. Julian. She tested the name, found it fit her tongue better than she had expected. What happens now? Now? He rose, pulling her gently to her feet. Now I return the egg to my grandmother, and I tell her that it was not a disappointing man who saved it, but a remarkable woman. And then... He paused, his hands still holding hers. Then I ask that remarkable woman if she might consent to remain at Croft Manor a little longer. Not as a guest, but as its mistress. Helena's breath caught. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious in my life. He raised one hand to her face, tracing the line of her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. You came into my house, accused me of arrogance, told me exactly how I was failing in my duties, and then proceeded to risk your own reputation to help me. You are the most infuriating, admirable, beautiful woman I have ever met, and I find I cannot imagine my life without you. You barely know me, she whispered. Then let me know you, he said. Let me spend the rest of my life knowing you. The crack in her chest widened, and all the feelings she had been holding back for so long came flooding through. Fear and hope and a fierce, desperate longing she had thought she would never feel again. I am not a good match for a viscount, she said. I have no fortune, no connections, a dead husband who left me nothing but debts and memories I would rather forget. I do not care about any of that. Your family will care. My family, Julian said firmly, will learn to care about what makes me happy, and you, Helena Thorne, make me happier than I have ever been. He kissed her then, there in the darkness of her chamber, with the sound of the other guests still murmuring in the corridor beyond, and Helena, who had spent 6 years convincing herself she did not need anyone, kissed him back with all the passion she had been saving for a man who might one day see her as she truly was. Epilogue. Easter morning dawned bright and clear, and the guests of Croft Manor gathered in the great hall for the traditional egg hunt. The children ran laughing through the gardens, searching for painted eggs hidden among the daffodils, while their parents looked on with fond indulgence. But it was not the children's hunt that had the ton whispering that morning. It was the sight of Lord Julian Croft emerging from the manor house with Mrs. Helena Thorne on his arm, a jewelled Easter egg gleaming in the sunlight between them. A public display of affection, Lady Featherstone murmured to her companion. The very height of impropriety. An engagement, corrected the Dowager Marchioness of Pembroke, who had arrived that morning from Bath and was watching the scene with undisguised satisfaction. My grandson informs me that Mrs. Thorne has agreed to become his wife. A widow of no particular fortune or connection, Lady Featherstone sniffed. A woman of intelligence, courage, and good sense, the Dowager replied tartly, which is more than I can say for some of the other candidates who have been thrust at Julian over the years. Besides, She smiled, watching as Julian leaned down to whisper something in Helena's ear that made the widow, soon-to-be Viscountess, laugh with unguarded delight. Besides, I have never seen him so happy. That, my dear Lady Featherstone, is worth more than any fortune. In the garden, Julian Croft tucked the jewelled egg into Helena's hands and said, "It is yours now. All of it. The egg, the house, the maddening family. Everything." Helena looked down at the glittering treasure, then up at the man who had given it to her. "I did not want any of this, you know. When I came here, I only wanted to protect Lydia, to get through the week without scandal. And instead, you found yourself embroiled in the worst scandal of the season," Julian said ruefully. "Instead," Helena corrected, "I found you." He kissed her then, in full view of the assembled guests, and there was nothing in his kiss of the rakish rogue he pretended to be. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found the one thing he had been seeking all his life and who had no intention of ever letting it go. The Easter egg, forgotten for a moment, slipped from Helena's fingers into the soft grass where it lay gleaming like a promise. When they finally parted, Julian retrieved it and pressed it back into her hands. "Keep it," he said, "a reminder of the most treacherous egg hunt in history." Helena laughed, the sound bright and free. "I would rather remember the man who hunted with me." "Then remember this," Julian said, and kissed her again, to the scandalized delight of every guest in attendance. And in the years that followed, when the story was told of the Viscount's missing Easter egg, it was not the theft they remembered, nor the chase, nor even the dramatic revelation on Easter morning. It was the way Lord Julian Croft had looked at the woman he loved, as though she were more precious than any jewel, and how she had looked back at him as though he had given her the only treasure she had ever truly wanted. Which in the end, he had. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell